to one and all. This is episode 18 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. If you're joining me on Spotify, iTunes, or any of the other audio platforms, don't forget to click like and subscribe. Or if you're joining me on my YouTube channel for the video version of the podcast, please, if you enjoy the content, click the like button and smash that subscriber bell. So we're going to go back to talking movies in episode 18, and we're going to be talking about Clint Eastwood, but from a different angle entirely to the podcast about his early 1990s career resurgence. So there's a few things on the table today, and I don't mean this. Today is the 37th anniversary of the release date of a movie of his I absolutely adore. It's not really on the first tier of what most people would consider Clint Eastwood classics, especially if you talk about movies where he both acted in, directed, or also produced. But the movie in question is Heartbreak Ridge, which was a very interesting, it's not really a war film, but it kind of is. It's more of a character study that has elements of a war film and elements of like the training sequence of Full Metal Jacket and that kind of area. Clint was in his mid-50s when he made Heartbreak Ridge. The other important thing to note about this, and something I am going to talk about in some detail here, it's the only movie that he made during the 2-year term he served as mayor of Carmel, California. When many people over the years have asked Clint why he didn't continue in politics. And he's given a lot of different answers at various points, and certainly now, age 93, that ship has sailed. If he was going to go further in politics, I would think that at some point in the decade of the 90s, and preferably early to mid-90s, is when he would have gotten back into it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the fact that his career caught fire again, he wasn't going to just leave Hollywood, and pipe dreams of maybe becoming governor, like, as you say, his friend Arnold. When Clint was governor, the one story that I always tell people, well, first off, when Clint was mayor, he ran for mayor in the first place because there were a lot of really weird ordinances in Carmel that were so absurd. When you think of a mayor, even at that level, even at a city level, you normally think in terms of partisan politics and, the stuff that we certainly see, not just in Washington, but everywhere, where there's a lot of infighting. Well, there were ordinances in Carmel that were so absurd that no politician was going to defend these ordinances. They had weird rules like women couldn't wear high heels above a certain inch at a certain time of day. And then they had, even the dumbest thing, is that you couldn't eat ice cream within the town of Carmel. There's like a village area, and at the time they didn't want people eating ice cream. So there were no ice cream shops in like the town square, or I've never been there, but that kind of area. And so Clint, who loved Carmel, as I always say it's his adopted home, more or less. He decided he was going to run for mayor as a nonpartisan. There wasn't going to be any of the usual politics or, arm twisting or anything like that. He just saw an opportunity, using his name, to change these ordinances that nobody, whether it was town council, nobody could get together to actually make some adjustments here to these absurd rules that were in place. So he did run for mayor. He won very, very easily. And his 2-year term did have its high points, that they were able to make these changes. If you go to Carmel now, you will be able to buy ice cream within the city limits and enjoy it on the streets, thanks to Mayor Clint Eastwood in the mid-1980s. I don't know about that rule with the high heels. I'm pretty sure they got rid of that too. It was so dumb. It was you know, they had to, and these were not things that were actively enforced. But the fact that they were on the books and people were complaining that, well, theoretically you could get a $10 fine for this, that's absurd. It's what it was. And his mayorship historically is considered a success. They didn't make any enemies, and he had super high approval ratings. And not just because he was Clint. Oh yeah, we know him in movies, and he was neighbors to many of the citizens. It's not a huge town. It's kind of an exclusive area. But the story of why Clint didn't go further in politics is ridiculous, but I've always tried to envision what I'm about to tell you in my head and how idiotic it was for Dirty Harry himself, the man with no name, to end up doing this. But when you get involved in politics, and we've seen it, you know, Ronald Reagan was an actor, Arnold. It's not a glory position. A lot of it is at the street level, doing stuff that you can't believe you're actually doing. So early in his one term as mayor, Mayor Eastwood, his office got a call that there was some kind of a dispute between two of his neighbors. I mean, not next door neighbors, but they lived not far from Clint, probably a quarter of a mile away. Very impressive, big homes, then as now. And so, at Mayor Eastwood, we have an issue that you have to tend to personally. This is actually going to be your call. So-and-so on whatever street it was is claiming that his neighbor is building a deck that is not code. And you're going to have to sort this mess out because the ordinance is not clear on this as to exactly how many inches, in what area, what are you allowed to do, so they're going to need you to go down there. So Clint Eastwood, age 55, going on 56. He hadn't yet started shooting Heartbreak Ridge at this point. He goes there by himself, takes his own car, doesn't take a limo. He shows up there, and he engages both of the guys. He was on good terms with both. They all knew each other, and not just because Clint was a movie star. And he's hoping that they can resolve this, just the two men and him talking. But the guy who lodged the complaint is not having it. He said, Mayor Eastwood, no, call me Clint. Fine, Clint. I need you to make a decision. I don't want this. You're going to have to get up on a ladder and measure it and tell me if this is code. Because if it is, I'm not going to say anything, but I'm pretty sure that this is not code, and he's not allowed to build it this way. So there's Clint Eastwood, a man who had already traveled the globe, been to the Cannes Film Festival, gave out Best Picture Oscar at the Oscars, is an international star, one of the biggest box office stars in history, is sitting there, standing there, in the middle of the afternoon on a beautiful, glorious spring day, up on a ladder, with a measuring tape in his hand, trying to figure out which neighbor was correct. And he said, while he was up on that ladder, he knew that he was not going to go any further in politics. That was the capper. If something as dumb as this could take up this much of his time and the time of his two neighbors, let somebody else handle it. I don't want to do this anymore. So that's the story of why he only served one term and why he didn't want to go any further. Because that kind of, if you want to use the phrase red tape, that's the sort of things that happen, especially mayor and below. Governor, if it's that, he's probably not going to get involved. He would really have to be friends with them. And even then, it's tough to imagine that any governor would be up on a ladder with a measuring tape in his hand. But as to 37th anniversary of Heartbreak Ridge and the movie Heartbreak Ridge, it is one of Clint's certainly second tier. It's not top tier. It's not Unforgiven or In the Line of Fire, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima, Gran Torino. But Heartbreak Ridge is an incredibly entertaining film. There's a lot of bad language. There's a lot of bad behavior on the part of Clint, but it's all for a purpose. And it's a movie that if you don't take too seriously, if you just kind of sit back and let it work on you. The character that he plays is some of his finest film acting, because Dirty Harry, in the 5 films, you don't really get that much of the character. He is an active character, but it's not really anything that unique in terms of story or what he's trying to do. He's just basically a blunt instrument trying to get the job done. In Heartbreak Ridge, he plays a super tough guy, a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, a massively decorated soldier whose personal life is a shambles. And it's like, as tough as this guy is, as much as he can beat up any man alive, regardless of their training, he's a guy who is questioning his life. He's coming to the end of his time in the military. And Clint was actually playing a little bit older than he was. You know, he had that rough-hewn features. He always looked a little bit older than he was, really until he got into his 60s and 70s, and then he kind of looked his age. But what he does with the performance is that he gives you enough to make you care about this guy, warts and all. And you really go on a journey with this character as he seems like a complete heel in the early portions of the film. He doesn't get along with anybody, and he doesn't seem to care that everybody except one guy hates his guts. But the combination of the training methods that he employs on the men in his platoon, it's the recon platoon, like reconnaissance, which was where his character, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Highway, started his career. And it's a long movie. It's well over 2 hours. But for me, it's the fastest moving long movie that I think I've ever seen, because there are so many memorable moments and great sequences of Clint doing Clint stuff. It's the kind of role that when his career is finally over and you take a kind of canvas of an extraordinary, I would argue the greatest overall Hollywood career ever, when you combine the producing, the acting, the directing, and the iconic characters that he helped to create, either as actor or director. He's number one, in my opinion. But in this movie, the way that he relates to the audience, the way that his character comes across, it is a character that will be remembered when Clint is gone. Or at the very least when he retires. Because, you know, his mother lived an incredibly long life. I believe she made it to 100, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope he has a lot more years left. But this character is one of the best characters he ever played. It's not based on a real person. You know, there are those who say, well, it's kind of a little bit of this guy, a little bit of that guy. You know, famously that Mel Gibson in the movie The Patriot was supposed to be playing, the character was modeled on, the character, he was known as a swamp fox or whatever. And it turned out that they couldn't do that because the real swamp fox was a horrible guy. Was it Francis Marion? So they made him, give him a different name, but it was kind of based on that guy. I don't believe there's anyone that was like, well, this is the real Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Highway. This is a completely new fictional creation at the time. And most of the movie was shot reasonably close to where Clint's offices were as mayor. So it's not like he was taking time away from the mayorship, but he was close enough where somebody could call him if he was needed, and it didn't happen. The filming was not interrupted. Somebody like me who thinks of these on this days and these sort of anniversaries, Clint at that time, this is 6 years before his big comeback, but he already came across as a guy whose sort of best days were behind him. And because who knew what was going to happen, that 37 years later he'd still be working. But it's probably the first film where that kind of process is at play. This is a guy, Gunnery Sergeant Tom Highway, but also Clint Eastwood, who might be nearing the end of the line. And I don't mean death, because Gunnery Sergeant Highway is in reasonably good health. He drinks too much, but he's not going to die. But his character is about to become obsolete in the world of the movie because he's approaching mandatory retirement age. It's part of the reason why he's so aggressive, whipping the young recruits who have really not done very much whipping them into shape, getting them ready for combat, even though there doesn't seem to be a war. You know, there were no more wars left to fight. That's this guy. One of the jokes is just leave him alone. You know, only break glass in event of war. But as with In the Line of Fire later, this character was personal for Clint because he was starting to get to that point where he's not really leading man material anymore, is he? You know, it gets a little wonky. Cary Grant was able to believably be in his 50s and, you know, have leading ladies in their 30s. But in Heartbreak Ridge, his leading lady is Marsha Mason, who is, you know, former multiple Academy Award nominee, but age appropriate. And when you were all of the talk about this guy's done, this guy's past it, you feel coming from Clint, whether or not he means to transmit this, but there is also the idea that, you know, this is not just a character for me. I identify with this guy, as he later identified with Frank Horrigan in The Line of Fire. And the movie was a box office success. I should say that the film does climax. The third act is based on a real United States Marine and military operation in Grenada that took place in the early 80s. But it almost is thrown in there, I hate to say as an afterthought, but the movie didn't need that. It didn't need to have a real-life incursion to work, because it is, as I say, it is a character study of a flawed man, but a man who, in his way, was brilliant in the world of the movie. This was a guy who really gave everything he had to his country. And as I say, Clint sells it. He sells the character, and the film did very well at the box office, and it was nominated. I want to say it was only up for one Oscar. I know it was nominated for Best Sound, but there could have been another one in there somewhere. But that would be the last box office hit of that era of Clint, meaning, you know, the Clint who was already a big star, and then in the 70s. So essentially, Dirty Harry was 15 years earlier, and there were a lot of critics that were saying that Heartbreak Ridge, and you could Google this, that it was the best film Clint made since Dirty Harry. Not everybody loved Outlaw Josie Wales. It was popular, and artistically, as filmmaker, many people even now will point to that, not as that better than Unforgiven, but that's one of his best achievements as director, the way that he was able to capture the landscapes and the way you felt the time period. He did it in Unforgiven and did it better, if you ask me. But this was a special film, and you know, it's sort of a little ridiculous, but there was an idea that the Army was going to help promote the film, and the U.S. Marines in particular. But when one of the higher-ups got a copy of the script, when he saw all of the, not just bad language, but the unbelievable stuff that comes out of Clint's mouth that's not just bad language. The insults, it's almost a little bit like, you know, R. Lee Ermey in Full Metal Jacket, which was the next year. So that they didn't want any part of it. You know, there's not going to be any Happy Meal promotion or anything like that. But the film was successful 15 years after Dirty Harry, and Heartbreak Ridge would be the last successful film in terms of a box office gross, because Bird got great reviews in 1988 and White Hunter Black Heart in 1990. There were critics that had it in their top 10 of the year. Major critics like Rex Reed was a huge fan. Vincent Canby, I believe, another guy, was a huge fan of White Hunter Black Heart. But it bombed. And so it was not until the story I told in a previous podcast that Clint's career hit the skids. It hit the skids after Heartbreak Ridge. So you can look at Clint's career from when he became a big star, which was with the release of A Fistful of Dollars, the first of the three Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns that he made, Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and inarguably a top 5 all-time western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So from 64 to 86, we're talking about a 22-year stretch where almost every film that Clint made as director, just starred in, was a success, was a financial success. And in some cases, there were Oscar nominations, but that era Clint was not really about Oscar nominations. He was more seeming to be, as far as pure entertainment, wanting to put fannies in seats, as they say. And that was, you could call that one phase of his career, or you could split it into two phases. But the last phase of his career, ironically, what you would call as a golfer, and Clint was a big golfer, the back nine. The back nine, even though Clint was already 55, 56 in the making of Heartbreak Ridge, back nine didn't begin, for me, as far as I'm concerned, until Unforgiven came out. So yeah, 37 years to the day. And if you're curious about Heartbreak Ridge, if you're somebody who is not just an Eastwood fan, but likes military films, films of combat, and films of the kinds of training that Marines might have to go through. I knew a guy who was a Marine who said that this film got a lot of things right. Not everything. They said he wouldn't be allowed to shoot live rounds. In that way, no chance. But it is a very entertaining film. And another that I recommend to people who only know Eastwood a little bit, oh, he's the old guy in Gran Torino, or I had to watch The Mule, God, he's so old, whatever. But Heartbreak Ridge is on the streaming service called Tubi, which is a free service. You might have to deal with some commercials. But it is absolutely worth the 2 hours and 15 minutes. And if you check out the movie, don't forget to comment. And if you feel like lighting me up for leading you astray and saying, bro, the movie was fucking terrible, that's fine. Because that's what makes a horse race. There are movies in Clint's career that I don't like that other people think are amazing. I wasn't the biggest fan of Flags of Our Fathers, and there were people I remember not arguing but debating. They're like, oh my God, it might be his best film. That's how it goes. But Heartbreak Ridge is a lot of fun, and he's amazing, and a very young Mario Van Peebles is also terrific in the movie. He almost steals the movie from Clint, which is very difficult to do. But that's going to bring an end to episode 18, the story of 37 years ago today, the release of Heartbreak Ridge, the last box office hit of that era of Clint Eastwood's career, and the only movie that he made while serving one term as mayor of Carmel, California. Don't forget to click like and subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or Google Podcasts, and please don't forget to click like and smash that subscriber bell on my YouTube channel, which I do try to make as much fun as possible for you when you check it out. So I'll be back real soon. Take care.